Hello and welcome to another edition of The Tigers Down Under. It's a pretty sombre occasion this week with relegation confirmed on Sunday night against Crystal Palace. I'm joined today by Logan to dissect the pretty disappointing game.
Good evening, Alex, and everyone.
Um, would you call that probably the most disappointing game of the season? Obviously, the outcome being the most disappointing, but just I guess even the most embarrassing performance of the season.
Yeah, I think the magnitude of the occasion, the fact that we were supposed to be playing for our lives in the Premier League, and the fact that we'd had a reasonably positive build-up after the doom and gloom of Sunderland. There, they kind of felt like there was a sense of optimism, and all the talk out of the camp seemed to be quite positive. And I really did think that it was a game that was kind of there for the taking, particularly because of Crystal Palace's result against Manchester City the week before, which really just kind of showed that there was a real opportunity there for City to be taken and to kind of secure their chance of staying up on the final weekend. And I think the fact that yes, we lost in a very convincing fashion to go down 4-0, and we're really never in the game. Because of the early goal that was given away at the start through Ranocchia's critical mistake. I think that, yeah, it would have to be classed as probably the most embarrassing, not only for the reason of the scoreline, but because of what it ultimately meant for City and doomed their fate.
Yeah, and I mean Palace had a few players out. I think Sacco was still out. I'm not entirely sure if Tompkins started, so their defence was certainly vulnerable. And even though we did concede after 2 minutes, it felt like it was a bit into the game because I think we'd had a chance or a half chance before that. So the game started in a really lively fashion, and it looked like we were up for the fight early. But just as early as that, and just as easily as that, we conceded the lead through that mistake from Ranocchia. Um, and he's not had a great couple of games for us, and I suppose in a way, it's been the undoing of us as the lone players just being that inconsistent player. I guess we spoke of the fact that bringing in these loanees, the fact that we were able to get them was because they were these inconsistent players who weren't able to get the best out of them at their parent clubs. So Nias at Everton, Markovic at Liverpool, they were very inconsistent players. Ranocchia as well at Inter was on the outer there as well. So and Jai last week against Sunderland was pretty poor as well. So. The writing was on the wall to a certain extent with the nature of the players making up the squad, but I guess it was just disappointing that after such tremendous performances against Watford and Southampton in the previous two games, it all came undone at the moment it mattered the most.
Yeah, and it does beg the question: is this idea of getting in loan players and hoping that they can do the job for you? Carrying a few, certainly, I think that has its merits, particularly in the calibre of player that we are able to get. But when you fill the whole list of your loan roster and you've got 7 players who really don't owe anything to City, if you like,
Yeah.
because they're not owned by us, do they have the kind of the grit and determination at the final hurdle? And I mean, there's probably some arguments to say that, particularly over the Sunderland and Crystal Palace game, that went missing.
And I don't want to cast aspersions too harshly, but Hernandez missing the game with an ankle injury. He always seems to have niggles and injuries at the worst possible times. So I think there's something to be said for the fact that he doesn't seem to have a whole lot of guts and backbone either when push comes to shove in these sorts of situations.
Well, we reviewed Hernandez a few weeks ago on the podcast, and I think that if there was a criticism that we did have of Hernandez, it was the fact that despite the time that he has been at the club and the duration that he spent in a City jersey, he still hasn't got as many games to his name, and apart from the exceptional championship season, really hasn't had the prolific scoring return that we would hope for someone that carries his price tag. So, yeah, I think it was just another case of wrong time. And we certainly could have done with him on Sunday, regardless of the fact that we never really looked like causing them too many issues.
And it just seems like everything went wrong for us that possibly could. We made 2 subs at half-time to really sort of liven the game up. But sure enough, straight after that, we had an injury to Maguire. meaning we had to use our third and final sub quite early in the piece. I guess the silver lining of that, though, was that we got to see Jared Bowen come into the game and really looked quite lively. And I think you made reference to it last week or quite recently about it was Atkinson and Cullen who came in for the last few games of the 2009-2010 season, and similarly looked really encouraging. And it seems sort of a similar trend for us here, where we're seeing these younger players coming into the side and really sort of flying the flag and actually looking quite good. And it's a good glimpse into what we might have to look forward to next season.
Yeah, certainly. I think that if anyone needed reminding of some of the quality players that we have got at our disposal in the form of Laura and Bowen and young Josh Tyman as well. Seeing the way that Jared Bowen took to the game, I think he was probably our standout player, and it looked extremely hungry and had quite a good match in a rather deplorable defeat. So yeah, certainly there are positives, and it did serve as a reminder, particularly for the doom and gloom that we will be playing championship football next year, that there are some players that will be able to come in and hopefully use the championship as their platform to make a name for themselves.
And sadly, we might have seen the last of both Robertson and Maguire. Both came off with injury knocks in the game, potentially therefore missing out next week, and all the talk is that they are likely on the move in the summer. What did you make of, I guess, their games, their seasons, and their impact at City as a whole?
I think that Harry Maguire, I'll start with, has just been an absolute colossus for us. I think this has been his breakthrough season in many ways. The confidence that Silva showed him, the fact that we've spoken about, that he's carried the City captain's armband over the last few weeks and has even been touted for England at various stages throughout the year. So I think that his season on the whole has been remarkable, and I think that it's really set him in stone, and I think that it's almost a formality that he will certainly leave the club. I'm disappointed that we didn't see as much of him as we kind of would have hoped to, because he was kind of buying his time for a lot of the reign under Bruce. And I think that now we've really started to see what a quality player we've had as he's developed. And I think that, that he will get picked up by a bigger club. And I dare say, I think he'll be playing for his national team in the next few years. In regards to Robertson, I think Robertson is probably the lesser kind of positive. I think he has had a good season, but I think that Harry Maguire's been a much greater standout. Robertson has we've watched him develop. He's obviously a very small player, and I think that he was very raw. He has been known to make some pretty large defensive mistakes in the past, but I have seen his crossing ability. He's got remarkably better, and his ability to defend over the last couple of seasons as well. And I think that he too is one that will certainly be a prominent figure in Scotland's side. And I think that he won't look out of place at a club in the top 10 Premier League sides, that's for sure.
And it's crazy to think they were both signed on the same day, so there is a lot linking the two players. So in a way, it's poetic that they're likely leaving together, whether it's at the same club as has been rumoured, with Liverpool interested in both of them, or whether it's separate clubs. The other person who Saturday's game may well be their last game in City colours is Markus Silva, and he kind of gave us hope in a season where probably come September, October, November even, most City fans thought we were already relegated. So he sort of revived that hope, for better or worse. It meant that we were a bit more disappointed when it was finally confirmed. He's obviously come to the club with a decent reputation on the continent, and it's only been enhanced with his home form in particular for City. But I guess the fact that he hasn't managed to keep us up might be a slight drawback for him. I'm not too sure. He obviously had a very difficult reign to work under and players to work with. Some have mentioned the concerns over the fact that his away form was pretty terrible and he couldn't turn that around for us. And obviously the 4-0 defeat to Palace on the weekend just underlines that. But on the whole, you've got to be pretty overjoyed with the impact he's had and desperate to see if we can hang on to him for next season.
Yeah, certainly. I think that if we're to be looking at drawing up our sheets of targeted managers of who we'd like to see as our number one next year, certainly his name would be at the top of the list. With that being said, I do think there are some frailties in Marco Silva's game. As you mentioned, the away form certainly left a lot to the imagination. But I think what I enjoyed about Marco Silva was the practices that he brought to the club that was very different, and the City players seemed to respond very well to it. The simple things like making sure that they all caught the bus to the team games, even the home matches, and having meals together, changing their nutrition. Everyone's spoken about these high intense training sessions. There just seemed to be a kind of a top to bottom approach in his overhaul, bringing his whole coaching staff with him, and he had ideas. And I think that given more time with the same coaching staff and the same playing group, I think that he would have really been able to flourish. So I think if he is to go, it'll be extremely disappointing. But yeah, whether he is destined for a top Premier League club just yet, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I think I've seen suggested the fact that the Championship is a tough division, but if you can have an organised manager with an organised squad, that's almost the best way to get out of it. That's the sort of the secret to getting out of it. And I think if we were to retain Silva, that would be the perfect recipe for us to do well in the Championship. I guess it remains to be seen over the coming weeks. I know he's meeting with the owners this week, so there may well be news on that front as soon as the Spurs game or just a bit after that. I know Ehab released a statement recently saying or promising that he would communicate more regularly with the supporters. So I guess it remains to be seen how regular that communication is and how open he is in terms of the management of the club going forward. I suppose just on that topic, we can briefly discuss some of the off-field commentary that's gone on since relegation was confirmed. I know that Hull Daily Mail, for instance, has become much more vocal in expressing the fact that the Allams should leave the club. And just today, I've seen that it's been confirmed that the Dai Yong family that was interested in buying us and came very close to confirming their purchase of the club have actually now bought a majority stake in Reading. So, I guess sliding doors moments there that they're sort of purchasing Reading and now heading into the Premier League, and very well could have been our owners this time last year. Or a bit after that, I should say. What's your take on the situation, and do you see it as another summer where we might be looking at new owners kind of circling the club?
I certainly can't see the Allams packing up shop and leaving now, given the climate, purely because I think the fact that they've stayed this long and tried to implement their ideas and rebranding and whatnot, the fact that a buyer or a suitable buyer hasn't come in while we were arguably a marketable Premier League club at some stage, despite only having 13 players at the beginning of the season, and then obviously rectifying the situation with this run home. The fact that nobody still bought Hull City, and we have been on the so-called the selling market for so long, is a huge concern, and I just don't think that now would be a suitable time for them as business people to release the club, which I think is extremely sad, given the rift that is widely publicised and has caused all kinds of problems between the fans and the Allams with ticketing, pricing, and as we said, the club rebrand. I don't think that a quick fix solution of having someone like the Reading owners take over necessarily is the best thing or the worst thing. I think that that's going to be somewhat of an unknown. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Reading, but I do think that the Allams are going to be very particular in who they sell to, and I think that probably and sadly suggests a much longer wait for the City fans before anything actually happens, and we do see the new owners come in that are going to be extremely welcomed and far overdue.
Yeah, and I will discuss the full fallout of relegation following next week's game. But I've seen a lot of comments so far, sort of spreading a lot of doom and gloom about at the state of the squad potentially heading into next season. And there's something in me that, I mean, as much as the Allams have sort of disappointed everyone at every opportunity, there is something to be said for the fact that in the last two championship seasons at least, so the first season under Bruce and then in 2015-16 when we were back in the championship under Bruce, they did do a very good job of putting together squads to challenge for promotion. And as much as there's criticism for how little they invested in keeping us in the Premier League, on the other side of the coin, that then means that because they haven't invested a whole lot, there's a lot of money sitting there that if they want to put aside a chunk for them to take, by all means, if they're going to reduce the debt, that's a great thing. and it still would leave quite a lot that they could then invest in the playing squad, especially after the sale of the few players that we're expecting will certainly be going, and whether any of the other ones make way as well. Um, there is some cause for cautious optimism about the state of the squad and the state of how we'll be heading into next season. Um, but one player in particular who I suspect will more than likely be there next season, especially now with relegation confirmed, is Markus Henriksen, who's our player of the week this week. Signed at the start of the season on loan initially, that was made permanent in January, and he's looked. I sort of compare him to his former teammate Janssen, who was at Spurs, who went to Spurs with a great deal of form from AZ Alkmaar, same as Henriksen coming to us, and neither seem to have fully lived up to that potential, but have showed it in glimpses. He got his first goal for us on debut against Stoke in the same game that Mason scored in, and I think he got an assist in the Newcastle game for Snodgrass's goal, or he at least was involved in the setup for that one. So he's shown some promise in flashes, but then he obviously had that bad shoulder injury against United in the League Cup semi-final, so he's been out of action for a fair while as well. But what have you made of his first season in England? It's obviously taken him a while to settle in.
I think it would be a first season that he would be very frustrated with. I think that obviously making the step across into the Premier League, he would have had high expectations and hopes for his personal goals and achievements that he would have liked to have obviously reached. It has been a slow season for him. It's one that hasn't seen him have the game time that he would have liked to have seen. And as you mentioned, the injury against United, I just think he's a pretty player. I think that he looks very smooth and calm on the ball. I just, again, don't think that we've seen enough of him to make a proper judgment of the calibre of player that he actually is. I think that stepping back to the championship may be a great starting point for him. And he is a player that I'm looking forward to a lot to seeing more of next year. I think that the championship would probably be closer to his level. And, I'd be really interested to see how he goes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is whether you saw him as potentially being more suited to the championship, at least at this stage of his career. Because I do agree, he does seem to have a very silky smooth manner to his game, but the championship may well suit him with his level of skill. It might help him to sort of work his way through defences a bit easier and almost be that Modiami style player for us, where he can, that little touch of magic to turn games on their head and really turn them in our favour. Could be quite interesting. And then, of course, if we're holding on to him and Diamande, who we spoke about last week, the pair of them being Norwegian may well give them a bit more communication and then help in linking up, much in the same way that Diame and Hernandez did with their Spanish roots.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that the fact that he does have Diamande, at least on the books at the moment as well, pending him obviously staying with City next season for the championship run, I think that is a certain combination that they could be looking to exploit, as it will be somewhat of a rebuilding period for us with, I'd imagine, a fresh new look squad and obviously a totally different target to what our expectations were this season.
Well, we'll move on and talk about the Spurs game, but I'll still mention Henriksen to start off with and ask you the question of how you see us lining up against Spurs and whether you see it as a sort of final hurrah for the Premier League boys, which on one hand you could almost say isn't necessary considering the majority of our first 11 aren't Hull City owned players, or whether you see it as a chance for us to sort of experiment and test out the 11 that we may well start the championship season with, in which case would Henriksen perhaps earn himself a start against Spurs alongside whether it's Diamande, whether it's Timon, whether it's Davies and Dawson in the centre of defence, whether, I guess Myla's out injured, but whether it's Klukas and Huddleston in midfield instead of Njai, things like that. How do you see the 11?
I think the fact that it is my pessimistic side, I think because we are down and out and relegation has been confirmed, I think there's no reason to go and play these low players and the team that we've been running with. A loss obviously against Tottenham isn't going to do us any harm. It's not really for anything except for probably pride. I think the fact encompassed that Tottenham aren't going to be playing for anything themselves, it would be the perfect opportunity to allow our younger players and our somewhat older boys who have been stewards of the club to give them their time. to see Josh Tymon and to see Bowen start would be probably, and Henriksen, even Sean Maloney as well, would kind of be the way that I would go for this weekend, and that's what I hope to see.
Well, we're in a pretty interesting position where we're 4 points behind Swansea, and I think we're also 4 points ahead of Middlesbrough, so we actually can't move positions at all. So it is sort of the very definition of a dead rubber. As a few stats, though, I mean, we've never won a Premier League game in May. We've never even scored a goal on the final day of the season. And if we were to win the game against Spurs, we'd still amazingly equal our highest ever points return in the Premier League, which is pretty ridiculous when you consider it, and it really reflects the fact that this season we went on a pretty decent winning run under Silva, but yet weren't able to move up the table very far because other teams were similarly going on quite decent winning runs.
Yeah, and as I think we mentioned last week, the damage was done in the first half of the season, and there can be no doubts about that. If we were to take away the damage that got done up until January or December until the Silva appointment, then we probably wouldn't be having this discussion that we're having now, assuming we would have probably bought ourselves 1 or 2 more wins. I think the other thing that is certainly worth noting is the form that Swansea showed. A few weeks ago, we also mentioned that the only way they were going to be able to stay up was through the form of Sigurdsson and Llorente. And obviously that has shown itself to be the case, because those two have been their spark and that touch of quality that the Swansea have had that we just haven't been able to muster up.
Absolutely. I mean, Sigurdsson with the goal against United and Llorente with the goal against Sunderland has really underlined just that fact. You know, if you have those quality players in the squad who can turn games for you, and it looked like Nias was going to be one of those players for us with his goals in the game against Swansea and in other games that were of vital importance, but it just seemed to dry up at the wrong time at the end of the season. So it's certainly going to be interesting to see how we head into next season and how we line up against Spurs. Do you see any chance of a victory against Spurs? I mean, Spurs have a history of losing pretty poorly to relegated sides on the final day of the season, especially after last season against Newcastle. So there's always the glimmer of hope in that sort of stat.
I can certainly see us knocking Spurs over on the sheer account that they've got nothing to play for like us. I think that the fact that we're at home in front of our home fans, and it is somewhat the farewell tour, saying bye to a lot of our players, I'd imagine, probably to Marco Silva also. I think that our boys may end up turning up with some kind of pride and reason to play for that Tottenham won't be able to muster, because they've got no need for it at all. And they're obviously very happy with the season that they've had to a degree, with coming short of winning the title. Apart from that, everything else has been ticked off. So, yeah, I certainly can see us winning the fixture, although the importance of it is just not really worth talking about. So, yeah, we'll see. But, yeah, I think it'll probably be 2-1 City.
And then just on Silva, do you see, if he were to decide not to stay on next season, as is sort of widely expected to be the case, do you see any sort of announcement prior to the game as sort of a way to say thank you to the fans, let them turn up to farewell him, or is it more a case that at the final whistle his body language might tell the tale if he sort of goes around the ground and farewells the supporters that way?
Yeah, I think it's more likely to be the latter. I think Marco Silva will walk around and farewell the fans after the whistle goes, and I think purely because he will want to show the fans that the last game will mean a lot to him and to his players, and he will want to get the result for them. If he was to come out early in the week and announce that was his final game in charge of City, that'd be an extremely dire affair, and I think that it may affect the kind of outcome of the final day. So he seems like a very calculated and measured man, and I think that he'll stick to that kind of same principle as he does everything so professionally in his last week in charge.
Fair enough. Well, it will be potentially his final game for City next weekend, and it'll be our final podcast for the season following that one. And we'll be back next week to discuss the fallout of that Spurs game. But for now, thanks for joining me, Logan.
No problem.
And thanks everyone for listening in. Hopefully we can finish off the season on a high with a good victory against Spurs. So, come on, City. You've been listening to the official Hull City Australia podcast. For more discussion, join us on Facebook in the Hull City AFC Australian Supporters Group, or follow us on Twitter at Hull City AFC Oz. The music was created by Amber and Black.
This is on fire. We're going higher and higher. There's no turning back 'cause you're